Thank you, and again, I'm Tara Magner with the National Immigrant Justice Center. I'm going to speak briefly because I hope that you all will join us in conversation by asking some questions for our panel. But I wanted to just touch on the fact that the film depicts a vision of detention that's very stark and isolating, and you can see the mounting anxiety of the detained character. But I think what you've seen here on this panel is an even more heightened sense of what this detention system means for people. 2.5 years in detention, no right to counsel. Luckily, Mr. Immigrant was able to obtain an extraordinary lawyer to represent him, but many people are not able to find a lawyer, let alone a lawyer who will take their case for free. People are often held in very isolated areas. A couple of these jails that Mr. Immigrant was held in are either 65 miles or 100 plus miles from Chicago, but the Tri-County Jail, where I think you were for quite some time, is about 5 hours away. So in the very southern tip of Illinois, where you can imagine it's extremely hard to find lawyers who can go to that jail, visit that jail, screen cases, and represent individuals, and certainly hard to find people who can do that free of charge. Many times the immigrant population, which is under civil detention, can be mixed in with the population of those detention facilities that are being held under criminal charges. They shouldn't be, but sometimes they are, and that presents some particularly sometimes dangerous but very significant concerns for us. And then, of course, the health care has been deplorable in many jails. In some jails, it's as simple as the jail staff not being particularly well educated and knowledgeable about what amounts to an emergency, what amounts to a regular sick call. But obviously, there are some cases that are extraordinarily tragic and caused by ignorance or lack of compassion. Or failure to transfer records. Many times all of those things are compounded and result in a single incident that is astoundingly tragic. One last point to mention is that all of this is conducted at taxpayer expense at about $95 per day per person. So Colby mentioned, 6 months for a bond hearing? Yeah. So the taxpayers are spending $95 a day to detain Mr. Immigrant before he can get a hearing to determine whether he should be released on bond, which is the equivalent of bail, sort of, for those of you who aren't living and working in this world every day. So you can imagine at 33,000 immigrant detainees on any given day in the United States, what that adds up to in terms of a social cost and a cost to our federal budget. So how do we solve this problem? My job is to sort of wrap this up with some solutions. As most of you, I'm sure know, Congress has attempted a couple of times in the last few years to pass very sweeping, comprehensive immigration reform bills, much more comprehensive than the issues we've been talking about today. Bills that include path to citizenship, or at least legalization for undocumented immigrants, guest worker programs, more family visas, so on and so forth. Those bills have failed both times, first in 2006 and again in 2007. Immediately after the 2007 bill, after the 2006 bill failed, it was an election year. Election years are very dangerous times to work on immigration reform. So in the fall of 2006, right before the election, in that year we had what's known as the Secure Fence Act, a bill that was enacted by Congress calling for a 700-mile physical barrier on the southern border. Almost every year we see an increase in the number of beds, what they call detention beds, the number of beds per jail, per facility, and that's how we went, now we're up to about 33,000 detention beds for immigrants funded by Congress every year. In 2007 and in this year, we've seen a sharp increase in enforcement actions by the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We all refer to it as ICE. This year, however, the one thing I can say that's good is that in this election year, we've managed to see almost nothing enacted, which in an election year is a pretty good result. Some attempts were made to pass very severe enforcement bills with harsh conditions, mandatory detention for people who overstay a visa. a violation of the law, but not exactly what we might think of as requiring mandatory detention sentences. And so we have managed to fight off almost all of that bad legislation this year. And we have high hopes for the future, but the overall enforcement climate remains, and I think the outcome of this election will be very significant in sort of laying out the path before us. We have two presidential candidates who have supported immigration reform. They've taken slightly different positions over the years. It's fair to say that that Senator McCain has gone from an extremely generous package that he produced with Senator Kennedy a few years back to something much more limited. His point of view is, I understand now America wants us to secure the border first. We hope not all Americans only want to secure the border, but we'll see how that plays out. Senator Obama has been consistently supportive of immigration reform. Unfortunately, they both voted for the fence bill, but maybe if nothing else, the economy may help them rethink that position in the future. But frankly, the composition of Congress is one of the most significant factors as we look forward. And it's not really a Republican-Democrat split. There are many Democrats who are skeptical about immigration reform. There are many Republicans who have supported comprehensive immigration reform. So it really depends on who's elected, what their views are, and we'll have to really take a close look at that after this election is done. There are a couple of bills that have been introduced recently. They won't receive any action this year because Congress is almost done working for the year. But they lay out very clear principles and clear positions that we can build on for the future. And one of them is described on the postcard you have. But there are two bills. One's a House bill, one's a Senate bill. They call for adequate due process protections for anyone who's arrested, humane treatment in the detention facilities, health care to be provided. They call for the standards that govern these detention facilities to be enforceable under law, so that if we have a terrible case like Ms. Velbachere's case, someone can go and sue that jail, not just for wrongful death, but for not following their own standards. So we urge you to use these postcards, and you can find your member of Congress also in the green handout, and write a note to your member and urge them to support humane immigration reform.